Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Chris Grady, Systems Engineer at Veeam. I'm joined by my colleague Asif Nabaim, a Senior Systems Engineer at Veeam. Today we'll be discussing Veeam Backup and Replication, technical onboarding, and a detailed overview of the product. And on that note, we will go off camera. All right, so a quick overview of today's agenda. So we will be giving an introduction of Veeam Backup and Replication and its capabilities and benefits, an overview of the architecture and core components, advanced features, optional components, general product configuration that might be overlooked or is definitely best practice, job concepts and best practices for designing and configuring the jobs, and restore capabilities and the different ways you can restore, security best practices and different features that you can utilize to leverage that, tips and tricks, useful insights, practical tips for optimizing Veeam usage and performance, and then some additional resources where it'll just be kind of a compilation of various documentation links that you can use. So, Veeam Data Platform. So whether you're new to Veeam or familiar with Veeam, this may look somewhat new, or you've probably seen this before. The color legend on the bottom left will show you the different applications, and then Foundation, Advanced, and Premium are the different tiers of Veeam Data Platform. So looking at the different columns are kind of different features or concepts, and then you can see which product you can achieve that through and which tier that would be. So with data protection and verified recovery, so that would be Foundation. On-demand assistance with AI is available through Foundation and Advanced. AI-powered malware detection, are some form of it with Foundation. Advanced and Premium is where you'd unlock a lot of the other more advanced security tools related to malware detection, like indicators of compromise scanning. More security and observability, AI, and then Recon Scanner is a somewhat new feature within that is part of the premium tier, so that might be worth checking out if that is new to you. And if you have premium and you meet certain thresholds, you can qualify for the Veeam Cyber Secure plan, which gives you an incident response subscription with 15-minute SLAs, a dedicated TAM, support account manager, 24/7, 365 days a year SWAT team, and quarterly security assessment checks. So that's kind of an overview of the Veeam Data Platform. Today is mostly going to be focused on Foundation, but some of the features will be related to advanced and premium features, or you may see them hinted at. So this is kind of just a peek at that, but we have other webinars on some of those other products. So supported platforms with Veeam Backup and Replication as of 12.3. So agentless or direct integrations with virtual platforms, vSphere, anything 6 through 8, update 3 would be supported, or VMware Cloud Director 10.1 through 10.6. Microsoft Windows Server Hyper-V 2012 through 2025. Azure Stack Hyperconverged, Nutanix 6.5 or newer should be supported. The Red Hat virtualization 4.4, Oracle Linux virtualization 4.5.4 or later, and Proxmox virtual environment 8.2 or later. So those KVMs, we're starting to add more of those. So those are all direct integrations at this time, and there will be more to come in the future. So, and then these are either if it's a physical server or like an indirect integration. If it's not a currently supported hypervisor, you can always use agents. So the operating system supported with agents as of 12.3 would be Windows Server 2008 R2 Service Pack 1 through Windows Server 2025. Microsoft Windows 7 Service Pack 1 through 11. The majority of popular Linux distros, which you can't really see the full list from here, but at the very, like the second from the last slide, there should be a link to our Help Center documentation, which will show the full list. But if it's a relatively popular distribution and it has ongoing maintenance, more than likely it would be supported. And feel free to utilize the Q&A if you have a certain flavor that you want to clarify, but most of them are supported. Also, Mac OS 10.13.6, High Sierra through 15 or Sequoia. You can use the Mac OS X agent to protect. IBM AIX 7.1 through 7.3, and Oracle Solaris, various versions there. Spark and x86 are supported in that context. So another type of source object you can use to protect with Veeam, or that you can protect with Veeam, would be unstructured data would kind of be like the category for it. So there's different types of that. Most commonly, you would probably think of like SMB or NFS shares, or like a file share on the network that you want to protect. It's like unstructured data, so it's not connected. So you couldn't use an agent to back it up. Basically, that would be the idea there. You can also, if you have like an enterprise NAS, you can connect and like integrate with that using a NAS filer. It's usually more efficient and puts less strain on the NAS during the backup. Additionally, beyond just like file shares, you can protect object storage. So any S3 compatible storage you can use as a source to back up from. So that would be, on-prem or in the cloud S3, like whether Amazon, Azure, or really any S3, and ONTAP FSX as well, which would be NetApp. Additionally, we have plugins. So if you want to use like the native database tool, but want to have a more resilient backup with the Veeam portability and like the central interface to restore from, you can use plugins, which essentially use the native tool and kind of point it to the Veeam repository. So you can do that with Microsoft SQL 2014 Service Pack 3 through SQL 2022, Oracle 11G, SAP HANA 1 and 2, and the user guide will have a little bit more info depending on the Linux specifics if you have any questions on that. MongoDB is a relatively new one. Versions 5 through 8 are supported with the plugin. IBM DB2, and that one is relatively new, DB2 plugin for 10.5, 11.1, 11.5, 12.1. And as a side note, definitely worth mentioning, Entra ID is a new feature or a new supported object that you can protect with VBR in 12.3 with VUL licensing. So if you have Azure workloads or applications or single sign-on or even M365, you probably have an Entra ID account, so that's something to maybe check out or consider. And so licensing, there's kind of two models with Veeam: the instance-based or Veeam Universal licensing, based on most customers' environments and just the direction Veeam is going. That is kind of the future of the licensing model, although per socket is also still available for existing customers. So it's basically licensing by the number of CPU sockets that have a CPU installed on it. And instance-based is more on the number of workloads, mostly one-to-one with some exceptions like with workstation OSs or unstructured data. So it's kind of number of workloads versus the number of CPU sockets are the two models, but the VUL gives you the portability of, whether it's physical, virtual, cloud, unstructured data, like some of those different workloads we just discussed in the previous slides. VUL can cover all of those, whereas socket would be just for like essentially VMware Hyper-V. So it would be probably good to future-proof yourself. And just to kind of reiterate that, there's a perpetual and subscription model for the licensing. So perpetual is permanent, so you get support and maintenance on a recurring basis, but the product itself is perpetual. And subscription, the license expires at the end of the term, and it's normally 1 to 3 years, and there are grace periods and stuff like that, but that's the idea. So moving on to core components and architecture, and so these are essentially, if you were to install Veeam Backup and Replication today, these would be the 4 components that are kind of by default installed all in one, and you would likely at least choose a different repository, but as you scale it, you probably have different servers for each of these roles. But to give a quick overview of each of these concepts, the console would be like the interface that you actually see when you're interacting with Veeam Backup and Replication. So it gives you the centralized management interface for VBR, allows users to configure, monitor, restore like backup and replication jobs. Uh, and you can do some troubleshooting, diagnostics, and security and compliance, basically everything within the VBR interface. The proxy is what is probably the most resource, well, repository potentially too, but proxy mostly is the most resource intensive component of at least how the four we're looking at. So it's kind of the intermediary between the source data and the backup storage where you're ultimately going to store your Veeam backups. So it will read the data, compress, dedupe, encrypt, um, and then send it to the repository. The backup server is the actual server, whether it's physical or virtual, although ideally it would be physical. So that would be where the application of that Veeam Backup Replication is installed. A lot of times the console and the server would be one and the same, but maybe if you're doing replication or have Veeam replication or VRO or something, and you're running the Veeam server at your DR site, you might just install the console at your primary site and point it to that server. So that's why they are separate components. There's other reasons you would too, but that's probably the most common. Then the repository is where you're storing your backups. So it stores the deduped and compressed backups along with metadata. It can be disk-based, cloud-based, tape-based, and we'll discuss the different options. But they're very scalable and flexible, the different ways that they can be configured. So installing Veeam. So if you are doing an update or like a new customer and you're wanting to download the ISOs for that, for in this case, Veeam Backup Replication. So if you go to my.veeam.com and sign in, or that link shown there will take you directly to the products page. And so you can download the ISO 412.3. That would be the latest version as of today. And you can also get the license key for that from that portal. There's a lot of other good resources in that portal. So that's where you would get the installation files. So once you download that and mount the ISO and run the setup file, this is basically what you would look at. You could install Enterprise Manager. In many cases, you would. The console, I kind of discussed the use case for that. The top option would be like installing the Veeam Backup Replication application itself. So then this would be kind of what you're looking at next. I would probably recommend signing in with Veeam to, that would be like an alternative to using the license, like connecting the license file. You can just sign in. It would have to be an internet connected Veeam server, but that would be ideal. If not, you can browse to the local license file that the my.veeam.com portal will provide. So if you enable telemetry or update license automatically, you do get more buffer for your license overages. That's up to you. It's an optional setting. Then from there you would click next. So these are like the prerequisites to install Veeam. So it will do a check for that. If you have all the dependencies, then you'll see all green check marks. In this case, that would be something you would have to like download. That's like a file that from the official Microsoft site they have a downloadable installer for, and we can help with that if that's an issue. But that would be the idea there. And then if you retry it, it will pass, and you can continue with the install. So this would be like the default settings. You can customize them. At this point, it does install PostgreSQL as the underlying database to store the Veeam configuration. We would definitely recommend that moving forward. And you can customize, like if you want to use certain ports, or if for whatever reason want to use a different drive letter for the cache or even the install folder. Yeah. So you have a fair amount of flexibility there if that is relevant. And configuration database. So this is, we're just talking about the PostgreSQL and SQL, but SQL is still supported if you did want to use that or had already like paid for a SQL full license. That's not going away, but PostgreSQL is kind of what the product will be developed for, it seems. So the configuration database is a Veeam built-in tool that backs up the underlying config database by default every morning at 10 a.m. So that way, if the Veeam server goes down, you can still import that config and access your backups. So it stores data about essentially everything you see within the Veeam interface. So since version 12, it will install PostgreSQL. You can change it to Microsoft SQL if you prefer that. You can also migrate it, and feel free to ask questions. There are some pretty good tutorials that we can send to you if you're wanting to go about that. Probably would recommend that unless there's a particular reason not to migrate from SQL to Postgres. So it can be installed locally or remotely, just depending on the scale or just the nature of your environment. And that's how it backs itself up. So, and just to reiterate, it's not actually, this is not a backup of your data because that's stored on the repository. These are a backup of the backups, like your settings and the infrastructure and jobs and like session history and all that stuff, and like the metadata for your backup repositories. So you can use that to restore or migrate to another VBR server. So here are a little bit more in-depth component breakdown. So those, I kind of showed the different 4 components earlier. This is kind of what it would look like with the production environment on the left side that that you're using Veeam to back up. So the backup server would be either the backup server or the VBR console. It would, whenever you kick off a job or make a change, depending on what you're doing. But the proxies, if you have more than one and you're load balancing, that's what that represents. And we'll describe this data flow when we describe like the transport modes a few slides down, but this is kind of a diagram of how those different components work together and the directions that the data would flow. So backup proxies, there are many kinds of backup proxies. By default, you'll see the VMware and agent proxies installed, but you can deploy other ones depending on what is relevant to you. So there is the VMware proxy, which is for VMware VMs. There is a CDP proxy that's specifically for VMware CDP proxies, which you would need at like the source and target site. If you are protecting Hyper-V workloads, by default, it would install an on-host proxy in larger environments, or if it's in certain situations, it would be recommended to deploy an off-host proxy, and we'll discuss that in more detail, but that is what that is. So then there are Nutanix has an appliance with a built-in worker, and with the KVMs or cloud proxies, we kind of use worker and proxy interchangeably. So when you deploy the Veeam Backup for AHV appliance, it has a built-in worker, and you can deploy additional, and the same concept kind of applies to Red Hat, Oracle, and Proxmox. And then the general purpose, so in the interface, it's called an agent proxy. It is kind of a general purpose proxy for either unstructured data or NAS backup, file share backup. In some cases, physical servers, if you have like a SAN integration or like off-host backup. And so what does a proxy do? I kind of described it earlier. So it retrieves VM data from the production storage, compresses it, dedupes it. I mean, depending on if you have it enabled to. Encrypts the data if you haven't enabled to, and then sends it to the repository or to another data store if it's replicating to another host. So the Veeam Data Mover is essentially the service that handles data processing tasks, like retrieving the data from the source machine, doing deduplication, and transferring it. So that is kind of what would get, like if you deploy a new server and you're wanting to install the Veeam Backup proxy role to it, the Data Mover service is essentially what would be installed on that. Same concept for the backup repository. So looking at VMware backup proxies, there are different transport modes, and depending on your backup window, depending on your expectations or your requirements, there are different modes. This is the default mode. It works pretty well, but it out of the 3 that we're about to discuss, it is the least efficient. So it will essentially stands for network block device. So it transfers data over the network, over the ESXi management interface. So there's no extra configuration, it kind of works out of the box. That's the benefit to it. But it is technically the least efficient, depending on how saturated that VLAN is or what the bottleneck is. But we can always work with you if you have slowness with that. But one way to speed that up if it is an issue is to use the hot add or virtual appliance mode. So this would be kind of like the next transport mode up in terms of performance increase. So better than network mode. It does require you have a VM on the host of the VM that you're backing up, and it must have access to the same data store as the VM. So that's kind of the idea of the virtual appliance hot add. So yeah, I mean, it basically sends the similar process, but once the snapshot is created, the disk is hot added to the proxy. VBR reads the data directly from the hot added disk that's attached to the proxy. Then after the processing is complete, the disk is detached, snapshot is deleted, which is always the case with any type of Veeam backup with the snapshot hunter. And then the fastest mode, so that it's kind of like good, better, best. So direct storage access would be ideal if possible, but there are more like prerequisites to utilize this. So it uses the vStorage APIs to transport data over a SAN using either fiber channel or iSCSI. So the idea here is it reads directly from the SAN without involving the ESXi host, except at like the very beginning to locate the VM. So then it triggers the snapshot, and then from here, after the metadata is retrieved and gets the layout of the disk, then it sends the data to the proxy, and from there, the communication is directly from the storage system to the proxy to the repository. So it puts less strain on the host or the guest OS, and or particularly the host, and reading directly from the SAN. It sends it to the repository. So those are the different transport modes for VMware. If you use Hyper-V, you would, by default, it would use the on-host I kind of mentioned. If that works for you, that would be ideal. But there are other, you can do an off-host as well. Usually in larger environments, that's where that would need, but we will cover that in a moment. So the processing of the backup data occurs on the node hosting the VM itself. This is all managed through Veeam, so you don't have to necessarily worry about it, but that is where it is occurring. So if you're trying to troubleshoot or like tune the performance, that is relevant. So queries the VM and host to get the information about the VM from Hyper-V, creates the checkpoint or the snapshot, uses the Veeam transport service to send the data, send the snapshot to the repository essentially. So kind of similar, just different terminology and different proxy deployment process. So that's the on-host proxy. So if that would be kind of how it would work out of the box if you were using Hyper-V. And then of course there's always a cleanup operation, similar to like with the VMware. You don't want to have like orphan snapshots. So in larger or medium to larger environments, you would have an off-host proxy. You would want the OS versions to match, and you'd want that to be a physical server, the off-host proxy. So then that would be a dedicated proxy for so separate non-clustered Hyper-V node, and uses VSS to transfer the data basically. So it's a similar process, but it's just the node that will be processing the data and transferring it to the repository is off the host to relieve the host from that processing. So if you needed to do that, that would make sense. And you can, if it's a physical server, you can allocate resources to make that run faster. And there are some SAN integrations too that you could use. But yeah, so then the cleanup operation, and so those are the two essentially types of proxy options for Hyper-V. So the next few will kind of focus on Nutanix AHV, Red Hat KVM, Oracle KVM, and Proxmox VE. So with Nutanix AHV, it uses Nutanix AHV's native capability, and in 12.3 we did add the integration with Nutanix guest tools. So it can create image level backups. It is agentless. So using the REST API, links with the cluster, creates a snapshot, deploys a worker, which is kind of like a proxy. Those are almost interchangeable at this point. So it mounts the VM disk to the worker via iSCSI, so almost kind of like hot add, you could think of it. Then the worker will retrieve the data at the block level. If you have it enabled, compress and dedupe the data, then transfer to the repository. So kind of similar, but it is a bit different though because of the appliance and the embedded worker. And at scale, you would probably have multiple workers. So with Red Hat virtualization or Oracle Linux virtualization manager, they're both built on Overt, so it uses the native Overt capabilities to create an agentless image level backup. So also uses the REST API to create a snapshot, then establishes the image transfer session, supplying the corresponding URL, deploys a worker, sends the data, compress and dedupes if you wish. And with Proxmox, kind of a similar deal. So there is the worker that, so basically launches the worker on the host where the VM is located. If none is deployed there, then it will use a worker from another host. And, at scale, that would be somewhere you could tune to kind of make the backup window smaller. So it connects to, so at that point, then the worker would then connect to the production VE server, create a copy on write snapshot of the process VM. The worker reads the data from the VM's disk, compares it to the snapshot created in the previous step, excludes changes, assuming it's incremental, and transfers the resulting data to the repository. So words a little differently, but similar. And removes the create snapshot. It's kind of always a cleanup process at the end, just to avoid any lingering snapshots on your production system, of course. So those are kind of what those are, and then from the Veeam interface, how do you add those? That is the question. So if you go to the backup infrastructure section of Veeam Backup Replication and click Add Proxy, these are some of the different. These are basically what we discussed earlier. In this case, we'll be choosing VMware Backup Proxy. So this is if you're deploying like a separate proxy that is not the Veeam server itself, which in most cases you probably would. So you would choose it would either have to already be added to Veeam as a managed server, or you can click Add New there and authenticate it. We discussed the transport mode. So depending on if the prerequisites are met for virtual appliance or direct storage access, automatic selection should choose the best one that it can. But sometimes it's best just to statically set it. And then the two checkboxes at the bottom, failover to network mode can be helpful. It's kind of a double-edged sword. So you might, so it allows you to basically fail over to the default network mode if one of the more advanced modes doesn't work. But then you may not realize that I wouldn't check that if you're configuring for the first time, but once you know it works, that's probably good to do just to ensure you have consistent backups regardless of environmental variables. So this is kind of a case-by-case thing because it does have a performance impact, but the data between the host and the proxy, if you want that data to be encrypted, and this is only really relevant for the network transport mode, then you can check that box, but that will either you'd have to add more resources to the proxy or the backup window will increase by checking that, but it does encrypt the traffic only from the host to the proxy. Otherwise, it would be encrypted either way. So connected data stored, if you had a particular reason to specify or exclude, but typically you just have everything. So max concurrent task, that is essentially how many VM disks can be processed by that proxy at any given time. So kind of a good rule of thumb is 1 CPU core equals 2 concurrent tasks. And one kind of a nice thing is if you hover over that green check mark, it'll essentially tell you how many possibly could be allocated there. Although if that server is doing more than one thing, either with Veeam or in any context really, I wouldn't necessarily recommend maxing it out, but that just gives you an idea of what that is. So like if you notice, like if you have a job with a ton of VMs in it and it's like blatantly the proxy is the bottleneck, if that max concurrent task is a lot less than the number of VM disks, that's probably why. So you may want to deploy some more proxies or add more concurrent tasks or cores. Memory is a relevant variable too, but more so with CPU. So these are the different types of backup repositories that you can send Veeam backups to. So direct attached storage, whether it's literally direct attached or iSCSI from like a SAN, network attached storage, dedupe devices, object storage or S3. Those are all different options and kind of fits into the 32110 because you do want to have 3 copies of your data in 2 different mediums, one of them offsite, one of them air gapped or immutable, and then 0 errors with some sort of testing. So these are kind of the different ways you can do that. A lot of times you're kind of trying to pick and choose with what you do have, and there's always new things being added. But you probably want to. There's various ways you can integrate with immutability, and we'll discuss that in a bit. But those are the different types of repositories. So these are the different file types that Veeam will create. You may notice them in your repositories, or mostly in your repositories. So I don't. Well, it's like the Veeam full backup file, the incremental backup, the metadata. The reverse incremental will be going away in version 13, but that is what that represents. The .bco is the file format for the configuration backup that we discussed earlier for the Veeam configuration database. So virtual full backup for tapes or .vsbs or .vlbs, you may not necessarily see those through the interface, but those would be the file extension created. There are various log backup formats and plugin file formats, as well as for the unstructured data backup. There's the vblob that stores data about the file share job, the vindex, which is kind of like metadata about the files and versions, and the vslice, which is also a metadata file that describes the allocation of data in the vblob. So those may or may not be relevant, but couldn't hurt to know. And so this is kind of another view of a slide that we've seen. So, but maybe this will make more sense now that we've described some of those pieces more in depth. But so the backup server, that's like Veeam Backup Replication. The hypervisor is, of course, your production workloads, if that is where that's running. It's not the only thing Veeam can protect, but in this context, then it would flow through the backup proxy using the data mover service and being stored, in this case, on a Windows backup repository. So, so previously that was like a direct attached storage Windows repository. If you wanted to attach it to like a NAS or something like that, like a raw SMB share, you would essentially have to install a gateway in between, which is just something that Veeam installs a data mover service on that can then communicate with like a CIF share or something like that. So kind of similar with object storage repositories, you would either have a proxy or a gateway in between, depending on really what you wanted to do, or if you're doing like a direct to object storage or through a scale out repository. It's really just like what everyone has most. You just don't want that to be the bottleneck, is usually where that would be relevant. Yeah. So how to add a repository. In this case, it will be direct attached storage. So if you go to the backup infrastructure area and then at the top left, click add repository. So these are the different options. In this case, direct attached storage, but there are a lot of different options. And so we're going to choose Windows. You can choose, anything that's under managed servers, similar to the other wizards, or you can add new if it's something that you're adding on the fly. You would choose the drive letter. Well, at this point, you're just choosing the server. Then you would choose the drive letter. The concurrent task, similar concept as the proxy concurrent task. So, it's kind of correlated to the amount of cores, and that could potentially be a throttle point, but you also might want to throttle it at some point too, and you can do that through concurrent task or the read and write rate. And so by default, anything that says recommended is checked by default, so that is good, but there are some cases where you may not want to use per machine backup files or something like that. It's pretty rare, but you might not, or at least it's good to know where this is. Decompress backup files before storing. that is good to do, especially for like dedupe devices. Um, and then the repository backed by rotated drives is like if you have like a makeshift air gap backup where you have like a USB drive that you maybe once a month plug in, do a full backup of maybe your mission critical workloads, then eject the drive. And so if you want to ensure that if you are rotating drives and a dependent file is missing, that it will just do a full backup. That checkbox will ensure that. Or well, you can kind of choose what it will do, but that's probably what you want it to do. Um, Okay, so then mount server is essentially like what will be the server that mounts the restore if you were to restore from that repository. So if you have a drive letter that has it's like a faster drive, basically, I would probably choose that for the instant recovery write cache if that's relevant. But the mount server, you just want that to be a server that is nearby in terms of like network hops or latency wise and has resource availability so that that's not a bottleneck. That you would pretty much always check that. So scale out backup repository. So that's a useful feature. It allows you to aggregate multiple backup storage repositories into a single logical unit for a Veeam job to target. So it'd be like one job targeting potentially multiple instances of a storage repository or separate repositories with different retention policies. Depending on the use case. And so the benefits to potentially doing that are cost optimization, scalability, uh, data retention, archivability, and just simplicity because you don't have to have a bunch of different jobs. It can be one job, potentially one job targeting several different things, as you can kind of see here. So scalable repository with multi-tier storage support. So the initial place kind of going from top to bottom on where the data will actually flow. So the backup from the proxy to the repository. So if you're using a scale out, it would land on the performance tier. So you can use any of those options, object storage included. So you can even send it directly to object storage. So yeah, that's up to you how you want to do that, but we try to give as many options as possible. Capacity tier would typically be offloaded to some sort of S3 object storage. And then archive would be like Glacier or Azure Archive Storage. And it is worth noting that if you did use archive tier, which by the way does require Enterprise Plus or Veeam Universal licensing, you would need to match the service provider. So if you use like Amazon S3 for your capacity tier, you would need to use Glacier for that archive tier to work properly. And if you're using like Veeam Vault or Azure Blob or something like that, you need to do that for Azure Archive to offload properly to archive tier. So how to add a scale out repository. So if you're on the backup infrastructure section and you click add scale repository, this is what you would see. So this would essentially be the name of the repository that your jobs would target, even though there's going to be multiple repositories within this. So that's kind of the concept, but we'll go through each tab. So the performance tier is as described where it initially lands. So this can be something you're already sending backups to or something new, but you're clicking add and you would choose that. So these are just happens to be in the lab what the options are. But essentially anything that you can add as a Veeam repository can, well, with some exceptions, but we showed that on the last tab. So like direct attack storage, network storage, object storage, all those are supported. You would choose one. Advanced settings, use per machine backup files. In most cases, I would recommend that unless you had a particular reason not to. Perform full backup when the required extent is offline. Probably would be good to do. It's just basically saying if you have multiple extents within the performance tier, and one of them is, having an issue or offline or just not reachable at the moment, it will do a full backup, so that way you don't risk having like incrementals created that don't have their dependency files in case that server doesn't come back up or something like that. You could end up using more space than you wanted to doing that, but you'd at least have a more resilient backup. So that's why it's not checked by default. So placement policy, kind of similar to that last point, kind of, but so data locality, basically any full backup or incremental will on the same extent, no matter what. Performance will place them on like it'll put the incremental on a different extent than the full backup if possible and that does allow better performance. But it is worth noting that losing an extent with a full backup makes the restore impossible. Unless uh, you know, yeah, if that file is not there, that's kind of why that previous tab mentioned the ensure the full backup if the extent's offline. So that is, depends what your priority is. And you can kind of configure that a little bit further with the backup placement if you did want to do that. And that's kind of saying like which extent, what type of files would you allow? And so this is like a policy enforcement feature. So it's by default, whenever we're unable to place a new backup according to the policy, it will be violated to ensure backup could still be created. So it's essentially saying like, would you rather have the job fail or do a backup even if it won't be able to restore? But there's some of the other checks we discussed, the ensure backup. That's usually not an issue, but that's just what that feature means. So if you want, so that is the performance tier. You've chosen your placement policy. Now you're offloading to capacity tier. So if you have already added the bucket or container, then you can choose that, or you can add it on the fly if you haven't already. So copy mode essentially means every 4 hours, if it notices a new backup on the performance tier, it will send it up to the capacity tier. Move mode means that, if there's a full backup ran and it's any old files older than, in this case, 14 days, um, copy it to the capacity tier and then delete it from the local repository. So if you have copy and move checked, then you're essentially doing the same thing, but you're copying the data up more frequently instead of because with the move, that would only occur as often potentially as you do full backup, since it has to have a full backup to delete the backups to avoid dependent files being moved to different tiers. So if you wanted to, you can force it to offload sooner if it possibly can, because it won't offload it if there's dependent files, but if it's possible to, for space reasons, you can set a threshold there. Then you can also encrypt the data uploaded to object storage. You can also set that from the bucket or container from the cloud side. So by default, it will allow the offload anytime, and you can set basically a window on when you want that to, if you want to limit that. Health check, normally I would say you'd always want to enable it. You probably would, but there would be some compute fees associated with that if that is, or there would be some fees associated with that since it's like cloud storage to do, because it is essentially doing a CRC scan to check for any logical corruption within the backup files in the capacity tier, and it'll attempt to auto heal and then alert you. So if it's not a cost concern, I would recommend enabling it. And a little bit more of a thorough test beyond the health check would be like Sure Backup, Sure Replica, and Virtual Lab. And honestly, Virtual Lab could be a webinar in and of itself. So that will probably be a topic. Well, we'll discuss it today, but we'll maybe do a deep dive on that for another webinar. But we'll discuss an overview of what those features mean and how they kind of fit together. So Sure Backup allows you to essentially automate recoverability testing, verification, and content scans. So it creates it in an isolated virtual lab environment, performs a set of tests, and then sends a report with the results of that test. So to give an overview of what the virtual lab is, it's a VM that gets deployed to your one of your hypervisor or one of your hosts. Within that VM, it creates an isolated environment to mount the backup files from the backup repository using the vPower NFS service. So it's isolated from the rest of your environment. It's in read-only mode, testing backup files or booting backup files, and then you can test to make sure they can boot or various other things that we'll discuss. But that's kind of what the virtual lab is. So it is a VM on your production environment that is isolated from the production environment. So you can test it without risking any impact or duplicate names or IPs and stuff like that. So to kind of reiterate that, so the the initial step would be to create or deploy the virtual lab and configure it depending on what you're wanting to test. That would kind of determine how in-depth that process is. Create the application groups, which are kind of like prerequisite applications or servers that you'd want to boot before what you're actually wanting to test with the Sure Backup job. Create the Sure Backup job, which is essentially linking an existing backup job, and then those backup files would then be tested using that process. You would choose what you want to test, so you can do like heartbeat, ping tests. You can attach scripts for further testing. There are some default scripts for certain roles like domain controllers, DNS servers, SQL servers. Recovery Orchestrator, our premium product for Veeam Data Platform, is where you get a lot more out of the box, like checkbox for more in-depth testing. But heartbeat, ping tests, scripting, and like malware detection and stuff like that would be what you would get with this Sure Backup. So then you would choose when you want it to run and like the frequency. And then when it does run, you would receive the report for that. So there's two. So if you were to create a Sure Backup job, this is kind of what that would look like. So this is after the virtual lab has been deployed and potentially application groups. So there's two different modes. The full recoverability testing would definitely be like if you have to test your backups fully, like for either business requirement or compliance reasons, that's really what you'd want to do. If you're wanting to do an integrity check or content analysis for malware or like Yara scans or some of those types of things, you can do the backup verification. That is kind of nifty because you don't have to deploy a virtual lab for that. But to do like a full boot testing of the VM or whatever the workload you're trying to test, you would need the virtual lab, and that's what the difference between those two essentially are. So kind of an optional additional feature that a lot of people like to use with Sure Backup or Virtual Lab is the on-demand sandbox. So that's basically just the virtual lab continuing to run after a Sure Backup job is complete. So the idea there is like if you need to make a change to a production, like a server in your production environment, or you need to apply some updates and you just want to make sure there's no unintended impact from an update or a change, you can make those changes in the on-demand sandbox, which again is a NFS mount of the backup file through the network in read-only mode. So you can do kind of whatever you want to it, and once you shut the virtual lab down, then those changes go back. So if it goes well, then you can apply those changes to production and feel better about that. And if they don't go well, then at least you know that and can kind of go from there. So that's a secondary use case that you can choose. And from the Sure Backup job, there's a checkbox that says like keep virtual lab running after a job, and that's how you would do that. And you would kind of console in and do your testing that way. So that's kind of a cool feature. So immutability in the context of data storage is essentially like a data property that prevents it from being altered, deleted, or tampered with once it has been written for a certain amount of days that you can define. So Veeam integrates with various types of storage to achieve that. So we will discuss that. So the idea of it is for integrity security, mostly for like ransomware protection, prevention, or even accidental deletions, because the core of the feature is even with like if you're in VBR and you have admin access and you like right click delete the backups, like it wouldn't allow you to if you have immutability enabled. That's the idea. So even a malicious attacker wouldn't be able to. So the types of repositories that Veeam can integrate with immutability to achieve immutability would be any S3 compatible storage that does support immutability. So Veeam Vault, Amazon S3, Azure, Blob. There are a lot of other ones too. Those are just what's mentioned here. It's a Veeam Data Cloud. That's what I meant by Vault. The Veeam hardened repository, which you can kind of do it yourself, so to speak, or there is a pre-built ISO for the Veeam hardened repository. And then we do have we do directly integrate with HPE Store Once and Dell EMC Data Domain for their version of immutability as well. So if you have those types of devices in your environment that you wanted to use as a repository with Veeam, you can utilize that existing feature within Veeam. So that's kind of cool. So in this case, if you're using a Veeam hardened repository, this is kind of how you would add that to the Veeam console. So the idea here is single-use credentials. So you're creating a temporary elevated account to deploy the Veeam data mover and authenticate the server. And the reason why it's a single use credential is because just for security reasons. So that way the root, because the root account can remove immutability flags. So you don't want that root account stored in the Veeam config database for any reason, just to be safe. So if you do that just to deploy the services, then you can, make it a regular account afterwards, so that way it doesn't have the same permissions. That's just the initial step that you need to do to add the repository and install the required services for the hardened Linux repository. It doesn't store it in the configuration database. That's the point of that, basically. And it is worth noting the user account you use for this, of course, must be a non-root account within the sudoers group and must have the home directory created on the Linux server. So after logged in. Making backups immutable. So here you can set the amount of days that you want your backups to be immutable for. It's always kind of ideally as long as possible. It's, you have to be realistic with how much storage you're using, but the longer you go back, the more you can potentially be able to restore back from if it's malware that maybe gets planted and then it kind of lays dormant for a while. And so you think you're backing up what you think is clean data, but it's not. So that's the idea. If you can go back like 90 days or something, pretty good chance you'd be able to restore in any scenario. But then it's kind of, if that's realistic, but you can choose that setting there. That's completely up to you. But once you set it, you can change it going forward, but it can't be modified for previous files. And you could probably imagine why that would be for security reasons. So same concept here. There's some extra considerations if it like with S3, like object storage immutability with like block generation. Um, but aside from that, it is the same idea. So storage integrations. So we do have a lot of different storage vendors that we integrate with for various different features. So definitely worth checking out the directory for the Veeam Alliance's technical integrations for storage integrations to see if something you have may be a good fit. But these are the different types of that. So there's the VMware integrations. There's really more than that, but so you can do like backup vSphere VMs using like the backup from storage snapshot, which puts less load on the guest OS VM. Snapshot orchestration, backup from like a secondary snapshot, and even more than that, really. NAS integration, so that was kind of the NAS filer thing that I was discussing earlier. So you can integrate, if you're doing NAS backup and you have a NAS integration, I would probably use that NAS integration. It will make things run smoother. Veeam agent for Windows integration. So if you have like if it's a Windows server that is connected, that's basically stored on a SAN that Veeam integrates with, you can use the Veeam agent for that. So in this case, essentially this is like if you're using a storage system that we have a SAN integration with. So whether it's a VMware VM, file share, or agent, that's the idea. So in this case, it's backup from storage snapshot, and it will describe a little bit more in depth what the difference is, but the main idea is that storage volume snapshot separately, which we'll discuss. Okay, so the main difference is the standard backup is basically creates the snapshot, as you can see with the gray, and then the backup process could potentially take a while. Usually does take a while depending on the size of the VM. And then depending on how many, the change rate during that process, especially with high change rate servers, you might experience VM stun when that snapshot commit occurs. If that is an issue, backup from storage snapshot or that write image will make a huge difference with that because the snapshot's created, stored in a secondary location within the array, and then it's just deleted afterwards. So there's no like consolidation process that would stun your VM with the guest OS VM. So that is ideal if it is possible with what you have in your environment. And so if you do have that and you wanted to, it's the feature within the job is enabled by default, but you have to add the storage to essentially use it. So this is where you would do that if you go to storage infrastructure and click add storage. And so these, if you scroll down, there's more options, and on the on our directory for the Alliance integrations, there it shows basically everything. But these are where you would choose whatever is relevant to, or like whatever you're trying to add for the storage integration. So for this case, we're going to choose NetApp, so data on tap. Kind of in our documentation will describe it, but even there, we'll kind of show you the different protocols you could use or different makes and models that are compatible. So you would choose the IP address of the management server of that array. You would choose the roles, so block or file storage for VMware, block storage for like a physical Windows server or something like that, or a NAS filer like we discussed, or potentially both. So then you would authenticate, choose the port, the protocol, choose the protocol. In this case, since in this case we checked the box for the vSphere and NAS filer role. We're choosing the protocol for vSpheres. So in this case, they're using NFS data stores. So that is what has been selected. You can selectively choose volumes, or by default, it will choose all of them. And same with kind of proxies. That might be relevant depending on the SAN that you have, and some of them have different rules for the access required from the proxy. Some are less picky. So it just depends, or I mean, you may have other reasons too, but you can specify the proxies that you would choose there. And then the mount server is the server you're specifying that will facilitate the mounting of the restore. So that anytime you see mount server, that's relevant to restores, and you want that to be something that has resources available, so that that's not a bottleneck for the restore. So then as filers, kind of same thing, but the difference is before we were doing NFS data stores, this is an NFS file share that you'd be using NAS backup with the NAS integration for. So that it kind of this it almost looks the same, but they're completely different production workloads that can be supported in this case. So this is what I was kind of alluding to earlier. So this is enabled by default from the job. So if you were to, let's say you have NetApp in your environment and you completed the previous slide steps, this would already be checked. So this would already be checked for at least for the VMs. So then that feature, assuming everything was done correctly or there's no issues, that would work properly. You can failover to standard backup or primary storage snapshot optionally. You can also limit the amount of snapshots if you want to prioritize the because you don't want to impact the production SAN if that is an issue. So this is a little bit different than the other diagram we showed. So this is backing up from a secondary storage snapshot. So if you have like a replicating array of storage systems, basically, you can have Veeam initiate the copy of or initiate the snapshot to the secondary array and then use that secondary array snapshot as the source of the backup. So from the Veeam perspective, it's kind of the same idea of backing up from the volume or the snapshot of the volume, but the benefit is you are offloading that load from the primary storage system. So in many cases, that could make a huge difference. So tape we will discuss briefly. All right. So tape is, whether we like it or not, still relevant, it seems. So supported tape devices, LTO 3 through 9, preferably closer to 9, but 3 through 9 are supported, and IBM 3592, TS 1160, and TS 1170 libraries. Essentially, any tape library that has a Windows driver that Veeam can communicate through, you can add as a Veeam tape server. So the purpose, I mean, cost or long-term data archiving and or compliance requirements. A lot of people also will use it for an air gap backup as maybe an alternative or in addition to immutability. Veeam can send ejection commands to the tape library to eject the tape upon completion. So that is an option. So that kind of adheres to the 32110. So supported data types for archiving, VM backups, VM agent backup, or Veeam agent backups, like disk to tape, so entire backup repositories written to tape, or you can do file, like it's called file to tape. It's essentially unstructured data being written to tape. So storage devices via NDMP, SMB or NFS shares, or you can even back up S3 storage directly to tape. So this is kind of what that looks like. So basically the tape server is the tape library is the actual tape library that you purchased. As long as it has a Windows driver that can communicate, as long as that library has a Windows driver, um, then you can deploy the Veeam tape server as that role, which will then kind of bridge the gap between the tape library. And then from there, that's just a component within Veeam. And so WAN accelerators, that is useful potentially for backup copy jobs, replication, CDP. Um, it it gives you basically it minimizes the data transfer volume, so it increases efficiency over a WAN link. So it gives you extra network traffic compression, multi-streaming upload, global data deduplication capabilities, variable block size deduplication, and it kind of is in two modes: high bandwidth mode and low bandwidth mode. So depending on what your uplink is at the source site, or well, that's usually the lower one, but uh, yeah, whatever your uplink is at the source site, depending on what the number is, you would choose the mode based on that. So VBR offers the WAN accelerator, combines kind of the things that we just discussed. So just basically before the data transfers over the wire. So again, this is for backup copy jobs or replication jobs that are going over the internet. So before it goes over the internet, there's an extra component on the source and target side that compresses and dedupes the data as much as it can before sending it. So I like to describe that as it's not going to cut your backup window in half, but it can make a noticeable difference, especially if you're pretty close to finishing within your expected window. Definitely something worth checking out. So how do you deploy it? So under backup infrastructure, if you go to WAN accelerators, you would essentially click add WAN accelerator. You will need one at the source and target side, at least. So I think yes, you'd assign the server. You can choose the port as long as you just need to be an open port. Choose the amount of upload streams, and you probably want to increase that to fully saturate the WAN links to the extent that you can without affecting other things. And then that's where that high bandwidth mode would be checked if your uplink is faster than 100 megabits per second. So the cache, um, basically you'd want to it kind of gives you a little hint at the bottom, but it essentially 10 gigabytes per operating system, and I believe you probably want a minimum of 100 gigabytes, I believe, but our documentation can definitely clarify. But that's just kind of like overflow for RAM or something like that. So that would be storage space consumed just as a cache for the WAN accelerator. That would be configured for source and target. And at that point, then it would just install those components, and as long as it has access through those ports, it should be able to. And so again, so that was one of them. You would need to have a source and target WAN accelerator at least. And so from there, and then this is like a backup copy job, same. This could also apply for a replication job, but direct is what it would normally be. So if you deploy the WAN accelerators, then then you would choose through built-in WAN accelerators, and the source one would be at the one local to where the backup is being sent from, or the host where the replica is being synced from. Then target would obviously be where it's sent to. Yes, yeah, so same concept for replication. And on that note, I am going to hand it over to my colleague, Estef.
All right. Can you guys everybody hear me? If you can, just drop a note saying that you hear me, okay? Or just give me a thumbs up. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to be talking about Enterprise Manager. We'll also discuss a few things within the main menu of Veeam Backup Replication, as well as doing restores and discuss security best practices, um, and conclude the webinar. Do not forget that you have a panel for questions. If you have any questions about what Chris have talked about so far, or you notice something that you want to um, ask a question about when I'm presenting, feel free to drop your question in the question panel of this webinar. All right, on that note, I'm just gonna start. All right, so what is Enterprise Manager? Enterprise Manager is your tool to manage multiple Veeam Backup Replication servers, multiple workloads that you have maybe at different sites, a different region, or to manage multiple, again, um, groups, multiple workloads, um, to be able to manage all of the jobs, to do some restore operation, to give role-based access under one single pane of glass. You can install it on the same ISO that comes with Veeam Backup Replication. You can assign the same license that you have with Veeam Backup Replication. This will work with the license that you are using for your Veeam Backup Replication console. If you have many of them, you would merge them and have them um, and add the merge license to Enterprise Manager. It will come installed with PostgreSQL, at least the new version will, and you can select the instance of Postgre to install it with, or just do the install on the same machine where Enterprise Manager will be installed. You want to install this on a separate server, although it is possible to install it on the same machine where you have Veeam Backup Replication, but it's general best practice to have a dedicated server for this product. This page here just shows the connection that you will be doing with the different components that um, you will be using along with the backup application and Enterprise Manager. So your VMware vCenter will be connected to the Enterprise Manager database. Um, your Veeam Backup Application servers, as well as their database, will be also connected to the same PostgreSQL that feeds the Enterprise Manager. And you also have Web Console. Um, the Veeam Backup Application database will be feeding data to the PostgreSQL database on Enterprise Manager. This is an overview of the main page of Enterprise Manager. You will have um, an overview of the backup servers that you are running um, with that you're managing on Veeam Backup on Enterprise Manager. Sorry, the number of jobs that you have running on them, physical machines or Asian backup jobs, um, file share jobs, an overview of the amount of data that is processed overall, um, the number of successful backup jobs, warning jobs, or jobs that ended up with an error. Um, Under jobs here, you will see an overview of the jobs that have run lately. You will be able to perform certain actions such as disable the job, run an active full, delete the job. You'll be able to see all of the machines that you are protecting, which backup server they're on, what's the name of the jobs that is protecting the machine, how many restore points you have, the location where the backups are sent, as well as additional information. You will be able to do some restores for applications such as Exchange, SQL, Oracle, Postgre. the same way that with the same level of granularity you're able to achieve on Veeam Backup Replication. You will also have a configuration tab for admins to see or add, manage the machines, the Veeam server machines that um, will be connected to the enterprise manager. Same thing for the vCenter servers. This is a great tool for role-based access, restore, and management. So you'll be able to assign roles to different users, and they'll be able to perform certain actions on the Veeam servers. Here's an overview of the roles. You have a portal user, portal admin that is able to do everything they want on the Enterprise Manager console. You have a restore operator, and each of those roles can be assigned to specific workloads, specific scopes, so that you can limit what those users can do on the Veeam server or on the Veeam server and the Enterprise Manager. So you can just add a user here, specify the role you want to give them. Uh, those the account type can be a user or it can be a group. Veeam Enterprise Manager also allows you to manage restoring loss password um, that you use to encrypt backups. This is a feature that is only available on Enterprise Manager and not on Backup Replication. With licensing, you are able to see where the licenses are applied. So with Veeam Backup Replication, it only shows you the license that are applied for the console that you're viewing. So let's say you have multiple Veeam Backup Replication consoles, maybe for different locations. If you are applying the same license over those Veeam servers, on each console, you will only be able to see the machines that are being backed up on that console. And it will show you on the license tab the machines for that server that are being, for which the license are applied, which means that you won't be able to see. So let's say you have 10 licenses and the machine number A, or Veeam server number A, is only backing up 3 servers. It will show you that you are consuming license for 3 servers, but the rest of them, you don't know how they are applied. You don't know how many left you can use. And this is a great use for Veeam Enterprise Manager. It really shows you overall what how your licenses are consumed, which servers are consuming them, so you have a better overview of how the licenses are managed. Um, and also, by the way, it's not advised to have the same licensing file for multiple Veeam Backup Replication server, but Enterprise Manager pretty much take care of that problem of um, that best practice. It just allows you to manage everything on the same console. You're able to see reports about the machines that are being backed up, where they're being backed up, when they were last processed. Uh, And that's pretty much, an overview of the Enterprise Manager server. Next, I'm going to be talking about the main menu. If you click on the 3-bar menu or hamburger menu on the top left corner of your Veeam Backup Replication server, you will have a couple of options to configure um, things to just run your backup servers in a more optimized way. The first tab will talk about the credential and password. So you'll be able to use tabs to create and maintain a list of credential records that you'll be able to connect to your Veeam components with. That will be things like your proxy, your repository, and other type of uh, components that are used with Veeam Backup Replication. You have the same thing for cloud credentials. So if you have some uh, object storage in the cloud that you want to add to Veeam as a repository, you'll be able to also uh, manage those credentials with Veeam. Same thing for your encrypted backups or configuration backups. If you want to use Veeam with key management server, you'll be able to also add those to the Veeam console. Same on the same um, 3-bar menu, you will have as a second option uh, tab to uh, create users and roles. Here you will be able to add groups or users that will be able to only perform uh, a limited set of actions on the Veeam Backup Replication server. There's just 3 of them. Um, there's the backup administrator, a Veeam restore operator, and well, actually, this I think there's more. I'm mixing it up with Enterprise Manager, but on the Veeam Backup Application Server, you have the restore operator, you have a backup operator, you have the admin, you have a tape operator, and you have a backup viewer. So the titles are pretty self-explanatory. The restore operator can um, uh, restore things on the Veeam Backup Application Server. The backup operator can create backups, also do things like Veeam zip backups, which I'm going to explain in a little bit. The backup administrator can do really everything that an admin can do on the Veeam Backup Application Server. Tape operator is limited to tape operations, and backup viewer can um, only have a read-only access to the console. You can add the users and groups by specifying them in the domain/username formats. So under network traffic rule, Veeam usually uses a multi-thread data transfer for job session. Um, from the source to the targets, and it does that over multiple TCP IP connections. But if there's too much, if your backups are running at the same times and there's a lot of loads on the network, you'll be able to um, disable the multi-thread data or change the number of TCP IP connection for a better uh, flow of the backups. You'll also you'll be able to add different IPv4 6 rules by specifying a range for the source and targets. You can create encryption for the network, or you can do throttling during specific period. You can also specify preferred network for the backup and replication traffic. Now, the global exclusion tab allows you to exclude machines that will not be processed whenever you have a backup, even if they are a part of a backup policy. We also have an option tabs that uh, includes several panels. First, we have IO control panel. You can use that to limit um, or to manage storage latency control on a data store. You will be able to stop assigning new tasks to a data store when they reach a certain point, or you'll be able to throttle I/O of existing tasks to a certain speed. You can do the same thing for individual data stores. The email setting tab will allow you to specify the SMTP, the mail server that you want to use to receive notification. You can specify the type of notification that you will be getting. So if you just want to get notification on success, you'll be able to do that. I'll be able to check a box, and you have a couple of other options: warning, failure, or suppress notification until last job retry. On the notification tab, you will be able to set up notification for things like the backup storage, running out of free disk space. You will be able to specify the percentage of disk space uh, to trigger the notification for. Same thing for production data stores. You also have an option to um, to give you to get a notification if your contract is about to expire, um, and also receive notifications when it comes to hypervisor updates. Here on the history tab, you are able to get to control the history of your sessions and how you view them. So you'll be able to see the number of entries in the history tab. You can limit it to a number of you can only show a certain number of sessions, um, or you can also change the retention for it to where it will only show you a certain number of weeks at a time. You can use Veeam to open a remote desktop connection to the backup server, and you can do that through PowerShell. You can run the Put utility, um, or just leverage the REST API directly from the console. So the configuration backup is a pretty important thing to know about. This is the backup of the Veeam server. It's not advised to use a Veeam job, a Veeam backup job to back up the Veeam server itself. So this is how Veeam does it. It allows you to create a configuration um, policy, like configuration backup policy, with a number of restore points, the time at which the configuration job will run, and location where you will be able to send that. It also allows you to encrypt it, and the encryption part is necessary. It's one of our best practice, so we highly advise to do that. And also one detail that is important to know is you should send it to a location that is outside of the Veeam Backup Replication server itself. So by default, it's sent to the default repository, to the default backup repository that is created when you deploy the Veeam server for the first time. That default repository is a storage on the server itself. So you just want to make sure that this is going to a different repository than the local, than the default one, which is the storage on Veeam server itself. And the logic for it is that you want to put it somewhere that won't be impacted in case the Veeam server goes down. Uh, when you face when your Veeam server goes down, when your environment goes down, the fastest way to restore your data is to first restore the Veeam server and then restore the production VMs. So you want to make sure that the Veeam server itself is protected and that the data is going, the backup data is going on a safe repository. This is also the same screen where you'll be able to restore from. So in case your environment went down, including the Veeam server, you just have to install the Veeam server again on on a new machine, and you will use this configuration tab under the three-bar menu and restore the configuration backup file on the new server using the same, on this by clicking on restore here. Yeah, you can also schedule or configure the email notification for the configuration backup. Next, we'll be talking about jobs. So jobs within Veeam encompass a range of tasks, including backup jobs, replication, restore operations, and Veeam allows you to automate the process of those tasks to make sure that your critical data is regularly and reliably protected against loss or corruption. Um, in order to do that, Veeam used the resource scheduler service to identify the priority of your jobs and allocate resources based on their type. So we have a prioritization list. Those will be the way that Veeam prioritize the jobs. On top, you have the data restore jobs. It's great to be able to back up, but you want to be able to restore in case of an emergency. So those jobs are first are have the highest priority for resources. Then you have your continuous data protection policy. Those are replication jobs that are run to make sure that there's very little the minimum amount of data loss when you're protecting your environments. Those come in second position. Background system jobs such as snapshot deleter to make sure that you don't have any orphan snapshot that is consuming resources and slowing down your environments. Those come in third position. You have your quick backup jobs. Those also come in fourth, and you have your high priority jobs. When you do create those jobs, you have the options to check a box to make them high priority, and those will be they'll have priority over your regular jobs. The high priority jobs are available for backup jobs, replication job, agent jobs managed by the backup server, and file backup jobs. Then in sixth position, you have your backup jobs and your replication jobs, and backup copy and archive jobs comes in last. So the backup process um, is done in the following way. Your Veeam Backup service uh, creates a Veeam Backup manager process for each job. The backup uh, manager reads job settings from the configuration database, and then it assigns a number of rules for the data movers to start the data transfer. The data movers are located at your proxy and your repository, and they're the one pulling and pushing the data during the job during the backup job process. Um, this is uh, the first step to create a job. Veeam will first ask you to define a name and a description and write a description for the job. This is the high priority check that I was talking about earlier that you can apply for a job if you want to make it high priority. On this page, you will be able to add the machines that you want to back up. There's different ways to add them. You can add them, um, you can click the hierarchical view here, where you'll be able to see all of the hosts that you've added to the inventory, as well as the VMs under each host. You'll be able to select them individually or select, let's say, a host to back up all of the VMs within that host. You will be able to oops, to see them in data stores, containers, select them that way as well. And you'll also be able to do um, to add tags. So those tags will be defined within VMware. You can also add a combination of tags, and you'll be able to add those to the selection, and Veeam will automatically select them. This is a way to dynamically add machines to your backups. Um, let's say you need to change something about a specific machine. You do not want to change anything on the backup policy that has already been set. You just have to remove the machine from the tag, and Veeam will not back that up. Once you've done your work on the machine, once you've done your update, you can just put it back on the tag, and Veeam will pick it up and continue the backup for that machine. So it's a way to tags are a way to dynamically um, add machines to your jobs without having to change anything on the configuration of your backup job. You'll be able to exclude machines. You'll be able to also exclude them per disk. You'll be able to use template to exclude them as well. Here on the um, storage tab, you will be able to select the proxy to use for this job. The selection can be done automatically, or you can specify specific machines, select specific machine, and Veeam will only use those machines as proxies. Um, you'll be able to select the storage where you'll be sending the backup. This will be from the list of repository that you would have previously added to Veeam. And you will be, Veeam will also allow you to select a retention policy. The retention policy can be done in days or in a number of restore points. Okay. GFS here will allow you to use the grandfather uh, father son to create additional fools that will be added to either the backup chain or will be set aside if they are outside the retention. And you will be able to restore back to these fools according to the schedule that you have specified. So for example, if you have a 14 days retention and you want to keep 7 um, monthly fools, it means that you'll be able to restore any days back to 14 days, any to any restore points back 14 days, but you'll be able to also restore um, every month, uh, 7 months in the past, if that makes sense. Um, on the advanced section, you will be able to define whether you want to create synthetic or active full. You'll be able to select whether you want to use the incremental methods or the reverse incremental uh, mode. Reverse incremental mode will be depreciated very soon, um, but uh, let's focus on the synthetic versus active full. the difference between those two is that synthetic will grab the incremental that you have on your repository and create full from those. Active will just pull the data from your production environment. So synthetic put the loads on the storage, and active put the load on production where it's pulling the data, like it does when it first creates your jobs. Your first full is created by doing an active, and then going forward, you can select to create synthetic to not put any loads on the production. Also, um, when you have more than, I would say, 7 days worth of backup, it is highly advised to have synthetic fulls or active fulls on the backup chain for you um, to get better chances to restore your data without any problems, if that makes sense. You can create, you can perform um, backup file health check to check corruption on the file um, every month or so. Like this is the default, but you can change the schedule for that. But Veeam will allow you to just perform checks on the backups themselves and give you, sort of like, uh, um, you know, have you let you rest to make sure that because it's checking to make sure that there's no corruption on the file. You can choose to delete data that for VMs that were deleted at production on the backup repository as well after a certain number of days. And you can also defragment and compact full backup file just so that the jobs runs with less, just run smoother on the backup chain, because when those operations of backups are running, there might be uh, some issues that arise as the backup chains goes forwards. So you can occasionally defragment and compact the backups just to make sure that they're clean, if that makes sense, to clean them up. Or you can change certain settings on the storage tab here um, about inline data deduplication, um, excluding swap file blocks, excluded deleted file blocks. This has to do with just improving really the flow of backup, especially on the storage itself, depending on the type of storage you have. We also have compression levels that you can change. The optimal is recommended if you are using a deduplicating storage appliance such as Exagrid, HP Store Once, that compresses further your data. There's an option called dedupe friendly that you can select here. Storage optimization will be the size of the block of data that will be created during the backup. This can also be changed depending on the type of storage that you're running. And this is where you'll be able to enable backup file encryption. Um, Notifications will be how you receive notification globally for, I'm sorry, for this specific jobs. You can have, you can define this globally as well for all other jobs, but if you want to have specific notification, maybe sender, I mean, the receivers for a specific job, you'll be able to configure that here. Um, Under vSphere, you'll be able to enable VM tool quiescence. This will be done. Uh, I mean, the native quiescence will only be used for virtual machines with application-aware image processing disabled. You'll be able to enable CBT, change block tracking for machines that are now running uh, VMware features. You'll be able to integrate here to storage snapshots. Chris talked about storage snapshot earlier. You'll be able to, this is pretty much where you enable that feature. You can further down change some settings like the number of process VM per storage snapshot. You can tell Veeam to create a standard backup uh, if the backup from snapshots fails for some reason. You can also decide to use the primary storage snapshots as the data source if the backup from the secondary storage snapshot fails. You can run script on the jobs as well, and you'll be able to define them uh, on this tab. Really. You can also change how often the scripts are run. And finally, on the next step, we'll be able to create application aware for applications such as Exchange, SharePoint, Active Directory, Oracle, PostgreSQL. If you hit the edit button on the specific application that you want to run this on, it will give you further options. You can select require successful processing if you want Veeam Backup Replication to stop the backup process when an error occurs during application or processing. Um, you can select try application processing if you want to continue the backup process when an error occurs during application or processing, and just create a crash consistent backup. And if you do not want application or processing, you can just click on disable application processing. Um, if you want Veeam Backup to process application logs, you can select process transaction logs. And if you're using a third-party tool to perform VM guest level backup, you can just select perform copy only. You can also select to use persistent guest agent. Veeam by default use non-persistent guest agent, but if you want to use persistent agent guest agent for an optimized or more secure process, you can just check that box here. This is the example for SQL, but this is where you define what you want to back up when it comes to application aware. So what this does, it allows you to go a bit further than just crash consistent backup and backup transaction logs to where when it's time to restore, if you did back them up with Veeam, you'll be able to restore at the transaction level. In general, application aware process is taking a backup of the VM at flight and at rest, and allows you to get very granular with the restore process. And in the case of SQL, not only does it allow you to restore granularly things like the tables, the databases. It also allows you to restore transaction logs. And here you can specify how often you want to back up the transaction logs, um, if you want to truncate them or not. Um, you'll typically you want to discuss those options with your DB admin, and if they maybe have a third-party tool that they're already using, or they are backing up the logs natively, they won't require any of this. But if they want to back up, to use Veeam to back up the transaction logs, this is where they'll be able to configure it. So the same thing goes for Oracle and PostgreSQL. It's pretty much the same features. You can set exclusions for files and folders as well. And you can also uh, write scripts. And the script will be for VMs that are now running, that's a running application that do not support VSS. Under guest interaction proxy, you'll be able to index all files that were backed up and allow you or your team to restore them individually. And you'll be able to specify the credential of the guest OS under this tab. You'll be able to test the credentials right away. On the next tab, you'll be able to schedule your jobs. You can schedule them at a specific time, daily, monthly, periodically, after a specific backup job. And you can also define how often you want the server to retry in case it fails, and what's the time in between those retry attempts. If you want to stop the job uh, outside of a backup window, you can do that so that the resources could be used by other process. And Veeam will allow you to see to select those times and the days for which you want to run that process. If you hit run the job when I click finish, Veeam will start the job right away, but you can also finish the job and let it run at the time that you have scheduled it for to run. All right, now we will be talking about the restore process. Veeam has a lot of different ways to restore the data. This is just to give you more options in case maybe one is not possible. If you click on the job under disk, if you open the drop-down menu, you will be able to select the file, and it will list uh, on top of the menu all of the options that we have to restore. You can also do a right click and see all of the options appear for the highlighted backup file. So we have the options to restore the entire VM, to do an instant recovery, um, to restore only virtual disk, instant disk, VM files such as VMDK. Guest file restore will allow you to restore any files or folder within the operating system. Application item restore will allow you to restore Exchange, SQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL, Active Directory very granularly. So any objects within those applications you'll be able to restore individually. You'll be able to restore to Amazon, to Azure, to Google, to Nutanix. You'll be able to export the backup, publish disk, and just to come back to instant VM recovery, you'll be able to use this to restore very, very quickly by mounting the backup file and spinning the machine on production or on a different at a different location, thus making the process very, very quick. So this is instant recovery, talked about in details. Like I was saying earlier, it will allow you to leverage the backup file that is residing in your repository while it's still compressed, still deduplicated, mount it to a server or a machine, and then spin that up in your production. This is the fastest way to recover your data. So it is the default way to restore quickly, but what it will require you to do at some point will be to migrate the backup file to production to complete the operation and have a full VM recovery. Um, so again, you can use it to recover very quickly, but once you launch instant VM recovery, you will have to complete the operation at some point. So after you launch instant VM recovery and your VM is back and running very quickly, you then have to migrate the backup file to production to complete the recovery. Because when you just launch instant VM recovery using vPower, and the backup file is still residing in your repository, there is temporary cache folder that is receiving everything that all of the changes that are applied to the machine. And once you migrate it, all of that is merged to the VM. And if it's left open for too long, it might, create some issues while it's merging. So you just want to make sure to finalize the migration. Instant VM recovery can also allow you to restore from one environment to a different one. So let's say from a VMware backup to a Hyper-V host, or even from like a physical machine to a VM. So you can use this to restore any backup file um, that was created by Veeam to a different hypervisor. This is the process to restore into Amazon. This will allow you to take the backup file using a restore helper appliance to restore it into a cloud VM. Most of those helper appliance for Amazon, EC2, and Google are only used during the restore process and then are removed afterwards. Um, and they significantly improve restore performances. But if you're using the same thing for Azure, it will be persistent, but will be powered off once the restore has run. Guest file restore allows you to restore anything within the operating system, any type of files, specifically FAT32, NTFS, REFS for Windows, and X2, X2, X3, X4, Ricer, FS, GFS, XFS, BTRFS, NTFS for Linux, and BSD Mac Solaris are also supported. It really allows you to restore anything within the operating system. When you launch the guest file restore, it will open up a tool, a new window that will allow you to navigate the machine, the files and folders within the machine, and restore them individually. Application item restore is very similar to guest file restore, but it's for these applications that are listed here. And again, it will also launch a tool. Um, the tool for Exchange will be called Microsoft Explorer for Active Directory, Microsoft Explorer for Exchange, and it will allow you to see um, the objects within the application the way that they were listed in the application and restore them granularly. So in the case of Microsoft Exchange, for example, you'll be able to restore mailbox items, folders, um, files within an email. An email. This is how the Explorer tool, presents itself. And as you can see, I can navigate through the different mailbox that I have, select maybe a folder, uh, click on an email, and this is all the options to restore that email that I have. I can restore it back to the Exchange server. I can export it as a PST file, save as an MSG file, save it to the desktop, or send it as an email. Restore entire VM will allow me to restore the entire VM, really. It's pretty straightforward. Um, when you do launch this, which the process is also very similar for instant VM recovery and a few other um, recovery options, it will specify the machine that you want to restore. It will highlight the machine that you want to restore. You'll be able to then select the restore points that you want to restore from. Once you select the restore points, you will have the option to select where to restore it, either to an original location, to a new location. You'll be able to use a quick rollback where Veeam will just restore the change blocks. We'll be able to use change blocks to do a quick restore. You can restore again to a new location with different settings. You can change the settings here, including the host, the resource pool, and the data store. We support restoring of the same disk type, tin, thick layer. You can restore it to a specific folder as well, and restore VM tags. And you can specify the network also um, if you want to restore it to a different network. You can also restore it and disconnect connection to the network. You can use secure restore to restore um, to scan the data with an antivirus engine. You can also use Yara rules. If a malware is found, you can select to proceeds, but just disable network adapters or just abort the restore process. Here you'll be giving a restore reason, so you'll just be filling this up with the reason for the restore, and this will give you a summary of the settings that you have selected. So now we'll talk about security and security best practices. With Veeam, you have um, from 12.1, I think that's when the name changed. It's called Security and Compliance Analyzer. It's a button that scans the data or scan the Veeam Backup Replication server and gives you 11 security checks and 19 product configuration checks. So it just gives you things to check on the Veeam server to make your environment more secure. So all of those are, again, configuration based on best practices. You have two groups. The first one, the 11 security checks, are mostly about services that you should disable to make your environment more secure. And the product configuration checks are mostly about the backups themselves, where they're located, if there's MFA set up on the console, if the backups are immutable, things like that. So you definitely want to use this if you haven't yet. Um, and you can, if let's say you get a notification, a red cross for one item, for example, um, you are, you know, uh, using a backup copy at at the storage level, and Veeam is not detecting that you're using a backup copy at the storage level. It's just checking for backup copy used with Veeam, and you really want to use the storage replication instead of Veeam, then you can disable the rule, for example. However, um, for this example, just know that it is advised to use Veeam um, copies instead of using the storage one, if possible, because Veeam is actually a backup software, and you want to use all the features on it to to protect the backups, to create your copies and to create your encryptions and things like that. Veeam supports multi-factor authentication at the application level. Um, Veeam will allow you to use um, a third-party authenticator app such as Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, um, to as a secondary verification method. You will be able to add users individually. So unfortunately, you cannot add groups. So each users will have to be added automatically in order to leverage this feature. And once they try to log into the console, they will be uh, seeing this QR code that they will have to scan with the Authenticator app and authenticate themselves before they can log into the console. You also will have access to for-eyes authorization, where Veeam will require a second admin before uh, changes such as deletion of backups of repositories, change to users, roles, access settings can be done. So this is a great way to prevent someone from changing some or deleting sensitive data on the Veeam Backup Replication console. You'll be able to add someone else that will have to um, uh, authorize those changes before they're done. All right, so now we will be talking about um, malware detection. This is something that Veeam has been trying to implement on the last releases. We are trying to make it um, easier for you to detect malwares and ransomwares. We can scan the backups on the repository and show you where possible malware, ransomware have been infected, have been have been uh, uh, are located. You can use the Yara rules to uh, scan your environment uh, to identify patterns that can be found in malware or families of malware, to then indicate the presence of a malicious software. It leverages antivirus and Yaroscan. The antivirus can be a third-party antivirus that you have. Can be you also have our own antivirus. Like I mean, it. I like to call it an antivirus, but it's more of an extension of a malware scan that also leverages Yara. You can use the scan to uh, find clean backups, find them, find the clean ones within a backup within a range, and find specific contents. So the sure backup um, is the options that you have to test your restore, and you can leverage the antivirus or your scan at this step. You can scan the entire backup, or you can exclude things to scan, and everything happens at the mount server. So here you can select whether to use URL rules or antivirus to scan to do the scan. When it comes to malware detection, there's a couple of ways to detect malwares with Veeam. One of them is the inline scan for encryption and text analysis. And what this does is, well, it's called the also called the inline entropy analysis. And what it does is using a machine learning model and a low impact entropy analysis that will check for things like encrypted files, onion links, ransom notes at the proxy level. This is done through the backup stream. So while the backups is running, and it will check for uh, those uh, three things that I just mentioned, and will alert you if it finds anything suspicious. You can change the sensitivity of it because it can gives you back false positive. So you just want to make sure that you select the appropriate level, and just keep in mind that it will run at the proxy level, so it might impact um, the 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 speed of your backups. So just use that accordingly. This is pretty much how the inline scan work. It again is using the backup proxy. Um, it's it's check for uh, and for malware. If it does notif if it does detect anything, that it will notify the backup server, which will give you exactly which restore points are infected potentially, so that you can resolve it. We also have a file detection um, at the under the malware detection settings that will check for, well, first of all, run at the guest indexing level, and will check for non-suspicious files and extensions, indicator of compromise, multiple deleted files, extension changes, and will also let you know once it finds any of those things, and flag them. So it will act very similar to the encryption detection when it comes to when it finds something. It will just put a flag on those restore points so that you can act uh, fast to resolve the issue. With Veeam 12.3, we have Veeam Threat Hunter, which is a signature-based scan engine that is provided by Veeam. Uh, you can use it as an alternative to a third-party antivirus software to scan the restore points. So it's automatically installed on a mount server, and it runs in the background. It can help you again find the last uh, uh, clean restore points for you to restore from, and it's the same tool that you can use when you perform testing of your backups. So with Veeam, you don't have to necessarily create a whole policy in order to create a restore points. You can create a quick backup. Um, quick backup will create an incremental backup without setting up a new job. It will add a new restore point to the backup chain that you already have. Um, but it requires you to have a previous full backup created successfully for the VM. You also have Veeam Zip that is pretty much the same thing as Quick Backup, but creates a full backup instead. So you can create an independent full backup that you can restore from. So once you get on the inventory and select the machine, you can then select to create the Quick Backup or the Veeam Zip. There is an integration with Enterprise Manager and vCenter that will allow you to um, manage from the Veeam from the vSphere console certain things when of the Veeam Backup Replication uh, 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 server. It will allow you to see um, the number of machines that you're backing up, the number of restore points that are available, um, the jobs that you are running. Um, you know, information about not only the backup job but also the storage, how much data is being backed up, the incremental size, the replication size, and things like that. We have a few tools that are pretty popular with our customers. The ability to move and copy backup from one location to the other. You can use the copy and move feature to move backup to a different repository, to move them to a different job, copy from one repository to the other, and it allows you to migrate data from REFS to XFS, um, which can be used for hardened repository, migrate from NTFS to REFS, rebalance scale out back repository, um, scale out repository extend evacuation. So it allows you to seamlessly move the data from one location to the other. Veeam extract utility is used when you need to restore um, data from a backup, but you don't have maybe the Veeam backup application available. So this is just the tool that allows you to restore without using the Veeam backup application server. But just know that we are not doing any type of um, locks on our backups, which means that any vendor locks, which means that if ever you are not using Veeam, but you have some backup that were created with Veeam, you'll always be able to wish to download the free version, the community edition, and restore your data. But if even that's not available to you, you can restore using the extra utility. For hands-on experience with Veeam, you'll be able to use hands-on labs, which will give you the ability to um, really play with certain products, certain features, certain specific tools, I guess, within the Veeam Backup Replication server, or of our other available products, such as uh, Veeam Orchestrator. Um, if you want to test, um, backing up and restoring an Oracle KVM hypervisor, you'll be able to do that. So you just have to go to our hands-on lab websites, and you'll be able to request a lab and play with the products to get more familiar with it. There's those labs really extend to uh, 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 a lot more than just our Veeam Backup Replication products. You can do the same thing for Veeam Data Cloud, which is our SaaS-based product for Office 365. Um, Kasten for containers backup. So just go to the website and see what interests you, and you'll be able to request a lab for it. You also have the same thing for like I mentioned, orchestration, um, Veeam Orchestrator, Veeam Backup for Azure. Um, you can scan this QR code if you want to access to the website, but if you just Google hands-on lab Veeam, you should be able to access the website. We also have available training for Veeam, the VMCE. We have theories and labs. They're available in 100 countries. Please refer to this website or just Google training Veeam University VMCE. And these additional resources can be helpful. We have the Veeam calculator if you want to calculate the backup, the amount of data that will be uh, generated based on the retention that you want, maybe, or the size of the machines that you want to back up. You can size that up here. We have a help center which resume really step-by-step guide and just like technical documentation across all of our products. We have a best practice website, mostly around Veeam Backup Replication, but you also have that for Office 365 that just summarize the documentation based on best practice. If you want to see new features from our latest release, you can. Uh, we have a PDF file available as a link. We have a bunch of KB articles that uh, directs you on how to, you know, resolve certain issues, but also how to perform certain actions. For example, moving data from one place to the other, or again, uh, issues that were resolved with Veeam, were resolved by the product team. You'll be able to find under our KB knowledge base articles. We have the R&D forums, research and development forums. Our community is very active on it, so you can really find a lot of answers to any Veeam related questions. And then you have the Veeam community forums, which is pretty much similar to the R&D forums, but is a newer community, a newer website. The format is a bit different, but this all will help you um, learn the products, resolve any issues you may have. But again, if that is not helpful, you can always reach out to us, and we'll be happy to discuss with you what you need to what you need to resolve, or whatever information you wish to have. Thank you for this session. If you have questions, feel free to ask them in the question tab under um, go to webinar. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us after this um, once the webinar resumes. So anytime you have a question, feel free to reach out to your Veeam contact, and we'll be happy to answer you as well. I'm just going to leave a few minutes for you to maybe uh, dish out more questions, and after that, I'll just resume the webinar. But thank you for joining.